So hopefully everyone can hear me. I can hear myself. Just wait for that. Cool. Wow, that's bright. Thanks everyone for coming to hopefully which is a quick but informative conversation around Google Maps platform and generative AI, because everything has got to have AI in it these days, so why the hell not? So just quickly, show of hands. Anybody know what Google Maps platform, not Google Maps, what Google Maps platform is? 2 people, awesome. So for those that don't, which is why I have this slide, Google Maps platform is your access as a developer into Google Maps, the entire ecosystem that we provide within that platform. So at a very high level, right, what does Google Maps platform consist of? So we have our actual maps where you can utilize and create really rich, immersive experiences using the same maps that Google Maps actually has, right? So we have client libraries and APIs and all the rest of it in there. But underneath the actual map, just the visual mapping between 2D, 3D, terrain, street view, all that stuff, right, you can also do routing. So if you want to get from point A to point B, right, you can use the same routing engine that Google Maps is, and actually under the hood, little secret, Waze uses the same routing platform too. So there's no really difference there. Places. So Google has the largest points of interest data, I'll call it a database, it's not really, but a database in the world, right? Our places data gets updated 50 million times a day. So that's everybody around the world updating, adding your reviews, your photos, changing places, business owners, updating their hours, all the rest of it, all the street view imagery. We also have environmental APIs. So something coming off is our new weather API that's coming out, right? If you want to do, figure out solar panels on rooftops, you want to get the air quality and pollen APIs, that's all within the environmental space. And the little secret blob in the bottom corner, mobility. So mobility, and they call it secret in the fact that it is something that we sell to large enterprises that want to offer a Google-like routing experience, but baked into your own application. We have stuff like Navigation SDK, where you can bake a Google Maps navigation, just like you do on the consumer on your phone, into your own application, get all the routing and all the rest of it. So that's just at a high level, in a nutshell, what Google Maps platform is. So the question is, why the hell are you listening to me? So my name is Shaun Mitchell. I've got over 5 years within Google itself. I spent a number of years in our cloud group as an application modernization and DevOps specialist. So I spent a lot of years working CI/CD, K8s, deep into that, across Canada mostly, and some work down in Florida and Mississippi. That got me into geospatial analysis and work around raster and vector data. So I moved over to Google Maps platform. So now I work with some of the largest global companies on geospatial and AI problems. So within my team as a customer engineer on the Google Maps platform, there's 8 of us that cover the entire globe. That's it, right? There's more people working in Calgary as customer engineers than there are us on the globe. I'll be honest with you, 4th point, I fought GenAI. I kind of didn't want to learn about it. So I'm not an early adopter by any stretch. I honestly just want to ignore it and hope it'd go away, and hopefully it was just a tech fad. I've been through enough in my career. And I'm also not a puppet, which that's actually created using Imagen. I thought it looked a hell of a lot like me, so it's not my profile photo. So the question I get asked all the time is, does our mapping platform, our developer ecosystem, actually have GenAI capabilities baked into it? Well, we do. But you'll see a lot of these that I'm going to talk about are what we call experimental, meaning they're not GA, so they're not paid for. You get to play with them. They may flex, they may change, and they may completely break. We're still learning on how to bake these in properly with the right privacy and security concerns into it. So what you're seeing here is something we call generative summaries. So we have 3 buckets of generative summaries. And what this is we've created a GenAI model behind the scenes, right, within the Google ecosystem. And we've gone through and looked at all the reviews, our normal places sort of descriptions about a POI, or point of interest, and I'll say POI a lot, so it stands for point of interest. And we've pre-generated these summaries. So we have 3 summaries within the Google Maps platform system. We have the places summaries. So an individual place, like the library here, will be a point of interest within the Places API. You'll get a place summary. So all the reviews that are created, right? Now, so there's a caveat here. If you're looking at this and you got a point of interest that only has a low number of reviews, you will not get a place summary. And the reason is we're trying to protect the reviewers, the people who upload these reviews. So you can't go and point out, well, Shaun wrote a really bad review about this restaurant or the library, right? Because I can see that in the summary. So there's got to be a certain number of bulk. I'm not at liberty to say what it is, mostly because I actually don't know about how many reviews there are. But there's got to be enough reviews for us to actually generate these. All right, so that's an actual specific place summary. It's really interesting because it's not just the business itself or the owner of that place hand-bombing in a description of what they are. It's generated by actual consumer reviews, right, from consumer Google Maps. Right, the area summary is if you want to show to your users or your consumers of your applications, right, let's say in this case the Tides Hotel, about the area that the POI or the point of interest actually is around and exists. So you get a bit of information. Again, all generated from reviews, and we have some metadata in place. So we have over 200 metadata fields about each POI. Some weird stuff like, is it friendly for dogs? Does it have washrooms? Does it have paid parking? And more other stuff like EV charging, the type of plugs and stuff like that. Contextual search. So this is actually one that is in flux quite a bit right now, but allows you to, when you call the API, you provided a natural language, an NLP type prompt, right? Typical prompt. But we'll go through and search all the reviews, right? And again, we're looking for the contextual sort of entity extraction within that to provide that, and then we'll provide where we found that, and this is where the reviews actually do come up, right? You'll see over here. I gotta figure out which way to point. You can see over here all the sort of which review actually did it. So if you're looking for like dog-friendly restaurants, you can see which review actually brought it up and why you're getting that. So again, it's grounded in reality. So as you probably know, there's some internet issues going here. So this morning I copied and pasted stuff I was going to just show you. I'm going to try a demo later. We'll see if it works. But again, because we're at DevFest and hopefully a lot of developers in the room, I did a simple curl command and just know how to do this. Back up 2 steps and just say, you'll see within Google Maps platform, we have an old Places API and a new Places API. Everything that I'm going to talk about is all the new stuff. The reason being a lot of our old stuff is actually going to go away. We haven't announced it yet, but it's coming. You'll get a year before you're forced off of it, but when it comes out. So everything will be all the new APIs, everything we're talking about. You heard earlier, if you were here, that Google Maps Platform APIs were one of the first APIs Google kind of launched, right? So they've been around forever, and the backend systems have actually spent a lot of time and energy in the last 5 years upgrading all those to more modern. You'd think Google, we don't have tech debt. Oh, we got a lot of tech debt. So we're bringing a lot of that stuff up, and Maps Platform's no different. So anyway, new APIs. Some of the key differences here that you'll see if you've used them is it's got, is your pointer not working? Okay, so it's got a new API endpoint, right? And the key feature here that I pulled out in green is something called a field mask. And this is quite a bit different than the old APIs in the fact that you can now ask the API to return specific fields of interest. In this case, we want to return the generative summaries, right? And what do you get? So you get a whole list. If you know anything about places, the ID that you see at the top there is our unique identifier, right? Just like any sort of data system, we got an ID to it, right? That ID is unique identifier for this place, Sareens in this case, and you can actually save that, right? You can store that to call it later. Pretty much can't save anything else, unfortunately, but you can save that. So here you're going to get the generative summary. So this is the things I showed before, the sort of places, area, contextual search. You get these into standard API response, allows you to bake it into your application, web, mobile, whatever you want. We have client libraries, right? So you've got JavaScript. That's the biggest one we have, right? JavaScript, but you can use Python and Node.js and a bunch of other stuff like that. So you got all these client libraries. I just use curl here for examples. But you're going to get sort of the overview, the high-level overview. You're going to get a description, and then you're going to actually be able to see which sort of reference reviews, in this case, that were used to generate that. So if you need to sort of show grounding, you can. This is an area request, so same thing. I'm only asking for the area summary, right? I'm not asking for everything because the payload of a Places API is ridiculously large. You don't need all that if you don't need it. Again, the same thing. In this case, you'll see that you get content blocks and the overview. So you know that you're getting an overview topic and the references. In this case, we're providing the place IDs, right? The thing to notice up there is you're going to get places / in the actual ID. Usually you got to strip out the actual ID, or when you call the place get details for this kind of information, you can use the full places in the get string. But these place references are the individual places that made up the area, so you can actually, again, depending on your UI, UX, you can do what you want. You can show each individual place, throw a pin on a map. It's all totally up to you. So I'm actually going to give you a sneak peek on something that we have loosely talked about in a blog post recently, but not many people have actually seen yet. And I got permission to talk about it because of the blog post. Maps grounding. So if you've been around the session today, even at the keynote, you'll hear a lot about generative AI and hallucinations, right? And if you don't really, potentially know why GenAI hallucinates, right? So you've got the traditional predictive AI models or ML models within the AI ecosystem, but GenAI is generating content. That's why it's called generative. Right? And it wants to answer. It is greedy, it wants to give you something, it wants to tell you something, and it will. Right? And whether it's totally fictitious or factual, it can be in the middle, right? So you want to ground. So within Vertex, right now, we have grounding with search. Right? So when you make a Gemini request, you can ground that data in search. So you'll get a block in the API, right, in JSON, with part of the Google search results on how it grounded it. You'll also see in preview ground with your own data. So if you can point your own data now and say, I want to ground on my own data. This isn't in the console yet, but it's coming because, again, experimental, launch, restricted access, come talk to somebody on the team and we may be able to get you in. You can now ground on maps, right? So in this case, if you're having a multi-turn experience, so in a lot of chat experiences, generative AI, you're going to have a single turn, which is part of my demo later, single prompt, single question, single answer back, or multi-turn, back and forth chatbot experience. Right? In this case, we're having a multi-turn experience, and the Henry and the Regency are within 10-mile drive, blah, 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 blah. Right? What we're returning is when Gemini comes up with, give me the best apartments, 2-bedroom apartments that are within my price range of this, that, and the other, and it returns this, Gemini's going to go back to our maps platform, right, our internal map ecosystem, and say, okay, Gemini's saying A, do I have real-world data to prove that A exists and is within drive distance or walk distance or whatever type of routing? Does it actually exist, right? And if it does, then it's going to return that and say, this is what exists, this is what I've been able to ground on in my response, and you can kind of look at everything else however you want. If you actually ask about a specific point of interest, not just like an area, we talked about area summaries, right? That same concept, not just an area, but a specific interest, and we'll actually return this UI place card, right, or UI widget that you can bake. You don't have to build all this, right? It's this disgustingly large widget ID you can bake into your experience, and all this information is going to come out from the Google Maps API's places. Right? You're going to see the photo, the reviews, the name, the open hours, all the rest of it. Again, it's going to ground Gemini's responses, but it's just an API request, right? And it's just an API response. So everything comes back in an API, right? And if you want to use our pre-built widgets, you can. You can also take a look at the raw data and all the different place types and everything else. So this is really cool. I've got customers, I work mostly down in the US. I've got customers down there, big real estate customers in retail and some finance customers that are all building chatbots based on this grounding. We're super excited by it. It's the first time to ground in real world and put in pre-baked widgets, right? So it makes things a lot easier. I had the widget in my demo, and unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to actually make it look nice, so I ripped it out. More about the widgets. So that's what's built into Google Maps platform today. You can just start calling, make an API request, start calling, and get some generative LLM type stuff. The other question I get a lot of, and this is where I spend most of my time, is can I actually use Google Maps platform with Gemini APIs? Yes, absolutely you can. There's always caveats, right? And we'll get to those caveats in a second. So I'm going to walk through a couple of slides that'll have some architecture type stuff and all the rest of it. But you absolutely can. So depending on how you want to, starting in that way, depending on how you kind of want to work over, but we use Gemini a lot, right? And I've got like 4 or 5 customers right now that have got experiences out there. Alaska Airlines actually just launched a really impressive one that I helped build for Cloud Next last year, and it's now live on their site. So you can basically do a, where do I want to travel? What type of travel experience do I want, right? And we use Gemini and generative with a bunch of this places data to go back and actually find places that Alaska travels, the type of vibe or experience I'm looking for, restaurants I'm looking for, tourist attractions I'm looking for. We bring all that back in and provide a response or an experience. We used Agent Builder to do that. That's why it's up here. And Gemini is basically just doing entity extraction. It takes a look at the entire question in a single or multi-turn, extracts the entities, and then you use that using a couple different, a couple different things to actually do your calls, whether you want to do travel, so you can use our Routes API, right? If you want to do look up points of interest, you can do our Places API, right? And put them all on a map or in a chatbot experience. This is the one I really wanted to get to. So in the case of Alaska, right, we pulled out all the entities of the extraction, right? We made places calls to make sure that what Gemini was suggesting, what it was trained on, actually existed in the real world. So we used something called function calling within Vertex AI to then call functions that were pre-built as cloud functions to call the Maps APIs. And we made sure that every single place that Gemini suggested actually existed in the real world, and then pull back some of the relevant information, mostly just some photos about it, so we could present that, or Alaska could present that on the website, and also reviews and some of the contextual summaries that were there. Right, I've got another customer that's actually using it for an internal application that we're using nearby search. And again, same thing, we're using function calling in order to call the nearby search API to find out where I am from a geolocation perspective. So we already know where the user is in a latitude, longitude in the world. We're calling nearby search to actually look for certain POI entities. Right? And Gemini is doing some of that work, but then we're grounding it by calling nearby search to say, hey, you say this is here, but is it really there? And more importantly, does it still exist, right? Is it still open? Is it closed? Is it whatever? So we do a lot of that. And then we filtered actually using the Routes API to do what's called a routes matrix to actually filter down a distance between different locations. So you basically can combine Gemini from an extraction standpoint and do it all. So this is the terms of service. This is the ultimate killer of Google Maps platform, in my opinion. So we have pretty restrictive terms of service. And there's lots of things you can and cannot do right now. It's ever evolving. But basically, you cannot take Google Maps platform data, all that places data, the routing data, anything like that, and send it to Gemini. So that sucks. Huge. But you can't do it. Our lawyers right now will not allow you to do it. Now, if you do it, we don't know, but you get caught, we'll send you a cease and desist. So what can you do? So that's why we use function calling. Single turn or multi-turn, you can return what GMP APIs are doing directly back to the UI or the UX or whatever end you're doing back in front end. You can return it there, but you cannot return it to Gemini. The reason we basically have that stance right now is we don't control if you're using another LLM. Right? You can use GMP with ChatGPT. ChatGPT will train on data, right? We don't want our data being used to train LLMs, right? We train our own LLM on our own data behind the scenes, but we don't want our data being trained for other LLMs, so we don't allow it. Except, there's always an exception, right? We have a brand new API called the Places Insights API that will actually allow you to send that data into Gemini. We have something called Advanced Places Insights, which is a BigQuery cleanroom product that will allow you to do geospatial analytics. You can send that to Gemini. It's the only exception. So I bring this up because a lot of people like to see a basic architecture, and as a cloud architect, I always feel like I have to draw something on the screen. This was basically the sort of Alaska flow, as it were, and I've got like 3 or 4 other customers doing the same flow. A search bar chat experience. We call Gemini function calling. There's some new stuff that just came out recently called controlled generation within Vertex AI that actually you can, and I'm going to show that to you in the demo, allows you to create a schema and then have Gemini always return. Before, you used to have to write a fake schema in your prompt and say, this is kind of how I want you to return it, and hoped Gemini returned it that way, and it did a decent job. Now with controlled generation, you can say, this is the schema, adhere to it every time you return. So you can kind of use either function calling or controlled generation to make API calls. This is even if you want to make your own back-end API calls to your own systems, right? Gemini does the entity extraction, right? It's all run on a web server, another back-end thing. You can then bring in your proprietary data, and obviously you want to put it on a Google map because it's the best mapping platform in the world, right? So let's do a bit of a demo here. I'm not going to promise this is the most awesome thing you've ever seen in your life. So I'm working with a number of very large real estate companies down south. And one of the things that we're exploring right now is the idea of when people are looking for properties, we want to change the experience. We don't want, and a lot of consumers don't want to go in there and say, I want a 2-bedroom condo, blah, 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 because I know where I want to live. With remote work becoming pretty popular and something that some companies are adopting, people are coming to their sites and they want to look for where to live. I have options now. So we're actually exploring the idea of, I want to find out where I want to live by a vibe, right? So in this case, what I'm going to ask Gemini is, I'm looking for a location, has an amazing nightlife. What is amazing? I don't know. We'll see if Gemini can figure it out. With live music, cafes, coffee shops that are open late in the western United States. So hopefully this works. I'm going to send this to Gemini in the most awesome progress screen you've ever seen. What it's going to do is it's going to pull back that entity extraction. It's going to look at that single prompt, and it's going to make some suggestions. I asked it to only return 2, just for screen clutter purposes, right? You can return as many as you want, but I asked it to return 2. And what I asked it to return is the name of the neighborhood. Not the city, but the actual neighborhood within the locality, right? And why? Why did you choose this? And I displayed it here. All right, so these are straight Gemini, really nothing to do with Google Maps platform. But what I did is then, from here, we're now bringing in, I also asked it to create a polygon. And I'll be honest with you, that sucks. That's probably the worst neighborhood polygon I've ever seen. But I had to ask it and see what it could do. This is our 3D maps experience. If you've ever seen it, it's pretty cool. We're doing a lot of work in the immersive experience. If you ever want to know about 3D cameras, we can talk about it offline. But I basically threw a polygon on a 3D map, right? Gave it some elevation, raised it up, gave it a whirly-whirl spin. So on a high level, sort of how did I build this? I'm using Node.js. It doesn't really matter. Again, the client library. Let's blow this up. So you don't really have to know the programming language. Each client library kind of has the general gist of it. So I talked about that control generation. So I'm creating a response schema here. So just a standard JSON, but I'm using our own, or the Vertex data types here. So I basically said, listen, return me an array of objects. It's going to have a neighborhood, a description, give me the boundary, right? It's going to have a lat and a long within the boundary, right? And they're all required. They're super important. As you've probably seen multiple times today, you got to come up with a prompt. I am not a prompt engineer. I am a geospatial person. But this is the prompt I came up with. So I tried to tell Gemini what it is, and that you care about vibes or feelings, right? And I really, really want you to return a polygon, right? So that's the boundary. We call them polygons. And they're made up of geospatial points, of lat longs, blah, blah, blah. And I really didn't want a square. Right? So I didn't want 4 points, because that's all it was ever given me. I was really hoping Gemini would have this. this is what I find funny. If you go to Google Maps and you look at the same neighborhoods, you'll get a really nice boundary drawn around on Google Maps. We don't expose that for developers like the rest of us to use. I wish I knew why. We just don't. So I have to fake it. And like I said, Gemini sucked at it, but we had to try. So, and again, I told it to return just 2 results, and this is what you get to do. We set up Gemini. Again, you have temperature, you have your safety controls. If you've ever done sort of setting up the Gemini API, it's a bunch of sort of just general setup stuff that we did, and it's all just kind of all standard. I mean, this is kind of just off the quick start in the grand scheme of things, and process through. And then from there, in this case, I'm actually calling, we have an elevation API. So on the 3D maps, if you saw, the polygon was actually raised above. So on 2D maps, we don't care about elevation. It's 2D. 3D maps, we care about elevation because we want to know how high to draw the polygon. And you could put an arbitrary number in there, but if you're putting something over like the Rocky Mountains, we're at a higher elevation than, let's say, Vancouver. So if you try to draw that polygon, it may disappear in the mountains. Right? It may disappear over Calgary because the elevation is not there. So in this case, I'm getting the response back from Gemini, and I'm grabbing the elevation so I can know which elevation to throw that polygon on. Excuse me. And then from here, behind the scenes, I didn't have it there, but just making some Maps API calls and then throwing it on like the pin, the center of the location, and bringing it up. Right. So eventually I'm going to add in here some points of interest within the polygon. I'm going to use the polygon as a constraining function to bring up some points of interest that will be actually interested in West Hollywood, Los Angeles, or whatever else the user chose. And that's about it. Like, it's really not that hard in the grand scheme of things to combine Gemini with Google Maps Platform. If you're Python, you can do all this within Python as well. Not the 3D maps, unfortunately. That's a JavaScript SDK. In our alpha version, but it's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Gemini. So all of that can be done pretty easily. So I burned through that a lot faster than I expected to. We got about 5 minutes if anybody has questions. If you don't, I mean, that's awesome sauce. I didn't think to put up a QR code of LinkedIn or any of that junk, but you can find me on there. Hit me up if you have any questions on Google Maps Platform or Gemini and AI in general. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.